Okay, picture this. Imagine a military commander who never lost a single battle. Not one. We're talking about a guy who fought over 50 major engagements against some of the absolute superpowers of his time, and he won every single one of them. We're diving into the life of a 7th century aristocratic cavalryman who completely, literally redrew the map of the Middle East, laying the very groundwork for an empire that would eventually stretch all the way from Spain to Central Asia. Today's explainer is all about the life, the sheer tactical genius, and honestly, the really complex legacy of Khalid ibn al-Walid. But right off the bat, here is the massive hook, this central mystery we're going to be unraveling today. What actually happens when history's most successful general gets fired at the absolute peak of his power? Right after his most colossal, historic victory, Khalid was entirely stripped of his supreme command. Why? I mean, how does someone go from being the totally indispensable sword of a brand new empire to just being quietly pushed into early retirement? Keep that paradox in the back of your mind as we trace this really astonishing career. To make sense of all this, here is our roadmap. Number 1, foe to sword of God. 2, the Ridda Wars. 3, the legendary Desert March. 4, conquering the Byzantine Levant. And finally, 5, demotion and enduring legacy. Chapter 1, Foe to Sword of God, Early Years. So Khalid wasn't always a champion of the early Islamic State. In fact, early on, he was quite literally one of its most dangerous enemies. He belonged to the Banu Makhzum. This was the wealthy, aristocratic, elite cavalry clan in Mecca, and he fiercely opposed the Prophet Muhammad. And you can really see the whiplash of his transformation on this timeline. Back in 625 CE, at the Battle of Uhud, Khalid was actually the guy who led the cavalry charge that dealt the early Muslims their only major battlefield defeat. He spotted a tiny gap when the Muslim archers left their posts, and he just instantly outflanked them. It was a move that really showed off his innate tactical brilliance. But then, just a few years later in 629, Khalid travels to Medina and converts to Islam, and it's a total pivot. Within 3 years, he's leading the Muslim armies, and by 634, he is marching on Syria. He went from being their greatest existential threat to their most vital military commander. What's really fascinating, though, is how he earned his famous nickname. Shortly after he converted, Khalid joined this raid into Byzantine territory at Muta, and it went terribly. It was a complete disaster. The Muslim detachment was totally outmatched by this massive Byzantine and Arab coalition. 3 successive Muslim commanders were killed in combat, one after the other. But then Khalid steps up. He takes command, and under incredible pressure, he orchestrates a masterful tactical withdrawal, which basically saves the entire army from total annihilation. Because he managed to save those troops, Muhammad gave him the honorary title Saif Allah, which literally translates to the Sword of God. Okay, moving to Chapter 2, the Ridda Wars, reclaiming Arabia. So this brings us to a super chaotic and deeply fractured moment in Arabian history. Right after the death of Muhammad in 632, the Arabian Peninsula basically just shattered. A lot of the tribes felt that their political and financial treaties ended the moment the Prophet died, so they rebelled against the brand new Caliph Abu Bakr. Now, Abu Bakr needed someone fast, decisive, and frankly uncompromising to bring the peninsula back under Medina's control. So what does he do? He unleashes Khalid. Operating with almost total independence, Khalid just rapidly marched across central Arabia, relying on pure speed and shock tactics to defeat absolutely anyone who stood in his way. But we have to note his rapid campaigns were definitely not without deep historical controversy. Let's look at the differing historical viewpoints regarding his execution of a tribal leader named Malik ibn Nuwayra. The sources are pretty split here. One side of the historical record claims that Malik had apostatized, he was purposefully withholding taxes from Medina, and was even collaborating with a rival prophetess. But the other side suggests Malik had simply paused his tax payments out of genuine confusion during the whole succession crisis, and that he had actually surrendered completely peacefully to Khalid. But what is completely undisputed in the sources is that Khalid executed Malik and then immediately married his widow. This sparked massive outrage back in Medina. A really prominent figure named Uman was furious and demanded Khalid be punished. But Caliph Abu Bakr ended up pardoning him, basically because he desperately needed Khalid's military genius to finish the ongoing wars. And look, purely from a strategic standpoint, Abu Bakr's gamble did pay off. The absolute climax of these Ridda Wars happened at Yamama. This was against a rival prophet named Musaylama, who had a massive, really highly skilled army. In fact, Khalid's initial assaults were actually beaten back. But he reorganized. He brilliantly separated his troops to incite tribal competition among his own men, and pushed Musaylama's forces back into a walled orchard. What happened next was so brutal, the sources literally call it the Garden of Death. Khalid won, Musaylama was killed, and he forced the incredibly powerful Hanifa tribe into a treaty. This victory was the one that definitively secured the survival of the early Muslim state. Chapter 3: The Legendary Desert March, a legendary feat. With Arabia secured, Khalid gets dispatched over to Iraq. He spends about a year there, successfully capturing towns along the Euphrates from the Sasanian Persian Empire. But then, a major crisis breaks out in the west. The Muslim armies in Syria were totally stalling out, and he got orders to immediately cross the map to reinforce them. To pull this off, he had to cross a massive, completely waterless expanse of the Syrian desert to catch the Byzantines by surprise. The problem? He didn't have anywhere near enough water skins for his horses and men to survive a brutal 6-day march. So, acting on the advice of a local guide, he used this absolutely ingenious, if, pretty harsh, biological water tank system. He restricted water from 20 camels, and then forced them to overdrink. Then, he bound their mouths shut so they couldn't eat anything and spoil the water sitting in their stomachs. As the army marched into the blistering heat, Khalid slaughtered a few camels every single day, using that stored water from their stomachs to keep the vital cavalry horses alive. He literally drank his way across the desert, popping out completely unexpectedly right behind Byzantine lines near Damascus. Which takes us right into Chapter 4, Conquering the Byzantine Levant, facing Byzantines. That stunning arrival in Syria leads straight into Khalid being appointed supreme commander. He rapidly coordinates all the scattered Muslim forces, captures Basra, and eventually lays siege to and takes Damascus itself. But the Byzantine emperor, Heraclius, was definitely not going to just let his prized province go without a fight. He sent a massive imperial army to crush the Muslims once and for all. Just let this ratio sink in. 4-1. That tells you everything you need to know about the stakes at the Battle of Yarmouk in the spring of 636. Historians estimate the Byzantine coalition outnumbered Khalid's forces immensely. We are talking about a huge conventional army of heavy cavalry, infantry, and allied Arab and Armenian auxiliaries. By every standard metric of 7th century military logic, this smaller Muslim force should have been absolutely annihilated. But this is exactly why they weren't. Khalid didn't fight a static, conventional battle. He fought a totally dynamic one. First off, he anticipated that the Byzantine heavy cavalry would try to envelop him. So he split his own cavalry and hid them strategically behind his flanks. Then, when the Byzantines pushed the Muslim infantry back, the Byzantines thought they were winning. But as they pushed forward, critical gaps opened up between their infantry and their cavalry. Khalid saw it instantly. He drove his elite mobile guard right into those gaps, completely enveloping the Byzantine cavalry and forcing them entirely off the battlefield. And then, the absolute masterstroke. He secretly sent a nighttime detachment to capture the Rakib bridge. This was the single, solitary route of retreat over the steep river ravines. When the Byzantine infantry panicked and finally broke, they realized they had absolutely nowhere to run. The fallout from Yarmouk was totally cataclysmic for the Byzantine Empire. Khalid didn't just win a major battle here. He destroyed the absolute last effective imperial army in the region. This victory firmly secured permanent Muslim control over Palestine and Transjordan, and it paved the way for them to retake Damascus and keep pushing all the way into northern Syria. To this day, it remains one of the most geopolitically consequential battles in world history. Chapter 5: Demotion and Enduring Legacy, a complex aftermath. And now we hit the great paradox of this entire explainer. Almost immediately after delivering this completely world-altering victory at Yarmouk, a new caliph takes power. It's Umar, the exact same Umar who was so furious about Khalid's execution of Malik back in the Ridda Wars. And Umar's very first major act as caliph? He shockingly dismisses Khalid from supreme command. Why on earth do you fire your absolute best general? Well, the historical sources offer a couple of competing theories, which we're presenting neutrally here. On one hand, Umar explicitly stated that he feared a personality cult. Khalid was just so overwhelmingly successful, so seemingly invincible, that Umar worried the troops were starting to put their faith in Khalid as a man, rather than in God. On the other hand, a lot of modern historians point to a much more pragmatic geopolitical shift. The phase of chaotic, rapid conquest was over. Syria now needed to be actually governed. Umar needed a careful, diplomatic administrator who could negotiate with local Christian tribes and set up a functioning state, not a swashbuckling, independent cavalry commander. So, Khalid was replaced by the much milder, more administrative-focused Abu Ubaidah. Amazingly, Khalid accepted his demotion with really surprising grace. He served as a subordinate commander for a few more years before quietly retiring to Homs, in Syria, where he died around 642. Today, his legacy is absolutely massive, but it's also very divided. Sunni Islamic tradition largely celebrates him as the ultimate heroic, foundational military figure. Shia tradition, however, looks at his early actions, especially the execution of Malik ibn Nuwayra, highly critically. Meanwhile, modern military historians, when they strip away the theology of it all, universally recognize him as just a supreme tactical genius, a guy who totally mastered logistics, mobile warfare, and pure psychological shock. I want to leave you with this final thought. Years later, as Caliph Umar lay on his deathbed, he supposedly reflected on all the men who had helped build this massive empire alongside him. And he said, "Had Abu Ubaidah, Mu'adh bin Jabal, or Khalid been alive, I would have chosen one of them as my successor." It's such a fascinating historical admission, right? It really forces us to ask, what is the true price of military genius? And can a state ever fully trust the very sword that forged it? Think about that for a bit. We'll see you in the next explainer.